This is Outside Source on BBC News for viewers in the UK and around the world. I'm Kasia Madeira. We are covering all the very latest coronavirus developments here in Britain and also globally. Our main headlines: staggering jobless figures from the US. The number of Americans to have sought unemployment benefits since March nears 40 million. We'll be live in Washington. China will impose a decree by decree, a new national security law that will give it an even firmer grip on Hong Kong. Activists fear it's an attempt to limit freedoms and silence Beijing's opponents. At least 84 people are killed as Cyclone Amphan leaves a trail of destruction across parts of India and Bangladesh. And we delve into the politics of Brazil as the number of deaths from coronavirus there nears 20,000 and infections skyrocket. Hello and a warm welcome to the programme. There are now over 5 million confirmed coronavirus cases worldwide, and roughly 1/3 of them are in the US, where the pandemic continues to devastate the job market there. Another 2.4 million people have filed for unemployment benefits in just the past week. Now, although the rate of increase is slowing, today's numbers mean that more than 38 million people have claimed unemployment benefits since the middle of March. That's nearly a quarter of the American workforce. Well, our correspondent Nick Brant puts this really into context for us. He tweeted that that is more than the population of Canada, the worst layoffs that the United States has seen since the Great Depression. And Samira Hussain picks up on this point and has more on what this could mean in the long term.
In just 9 weeks, the entire population of Canada lost their jobs. But as you rightly pointed out, the numbers at this weekly pace is starting to drop. Remember, the all-time high that we had hit was 6.9 million, and that happened at the end of March. So we are seeing these numbers come down. But now what is really worrying some economists is just how permanent some of these layoffs will be. I think initially most people believed that these were all going to be just initial layoffs while restaurants and stores were closed. But once economies started reopening, those jobs would come back roaring. Now we're seeing that actually, in fact, some people are suggesting that these layoffs may actually, in fact, be permanent. One economist has estimated that maybe 40% of these layoffs could be permanent. And if that is, in fact, the case, this recovery for the U.S. economy is going to be very long and very difficult.
Let's pick up on some of what Samira was saying, and also let's hear what Donald Trump has recently said. Katty Kay is live monitoring all of this from Washington for us. So, Katty, the president has been speaking about these latest figures. What's he had to say?
Yeah, look, everybody realizes now that this is going to take quite a long time for the US to recover. The president has actually just landed in Michigan and he's touring a Ford plant. And of course, his emphasis today is on reopening the economy. And he still says that he thinks there can be a strong recovery and a swift recovery because people have been laid off. And as he says, they're desperate to get back to work. They're desperate to get back to normality again. But I think, if these economists who are saying that some of these jobs are never coming back, 42% some economists are saying are never coming back of these jobs, it's very hard to see how this is going to be what the president is hoping is going to be a V-curve recovery, i.e. a swift bounce down, but a swift bounce back up again. It's increasingly hard to see how that's going to happen.
Katty, we don't have much time, but in terms of what this is doing for the president's popularity, it must be having an impact.
Well, the whole handling of the coronavirus has had some impact, but the president's supporters, as we've been hearing, are still very much committed to the idea that he is doing a good job personally, and they still have faith in him. So his base seems to be holding with him through all of the coronavirus and through all of this economic disruption.
Katty, thank you so much. Katty Kay there live from Washington, as always, putting a perspective there on the situation, those huge job unemployment figures coming from the United States. We have many more details about those figures and the long-term impact on our website, a lot more analysis as well. Just go onto the bbc.com/news website. To viewers joining us here in the UK, welcome. China is proposing to introduce new security laws in Hong Kong. The issue is on the agenda for the National People's Congress session, which starts in Beijing on Friday. The NPC is China's parliament, though it's seen as little more than a rubber stamp for Communist Party decisions. Opponents say that the new laws essentially amount to a power grab by China. Beijing says that the law will bring Hong Kong into line with the mainland. Well, here's a government spokesperson.
National security is the bedrock of the country's stability. Safeguarding national security is the common interest of all people, including Hong Kong compatriots.
Now, Hong Kong's mini-constitution, called the Basic Law, does require its government to bring in a security law. And Beijing has always had the power to enact the national security law into the Basic Law. However, that's not how many in Hong Kong see this move, though. Just have a listen to this.
This is the end of Hong Kong. This is the end of one country, two systems. Make no mistake about it, that Beijing, the Central People's Government, has completely breached its promise to the Hong Kong people, a promise that was enshrined in the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. And they are now completely walking back on their obligation owed to the Hong Kong people.
So you can hear there are clearly fears that these proposed laws are actually aimed at suppressing scenes like these ones. These were images, those violent clashes between authorities and pro-democracy protesters back in 2019 and even a little earlier this year. This was in response to a bill that would allow Beijing to extradite people to mainland China to face trial. Here's Martin Yip in Hong Kong with more on this.
We might not know any formal details until they actually pass the resolution, but what we can tell from those leaks on local media, multiple media outlets in Hong Kong, include subversion, separatism, terror activities, and foreign intervention. It's said to be a decision to be passed by the National People's Congress, so it's more likely to be like a decree from, rather than like a full piece of law with jail time and all that. But these are the four areas that will be covered in this law. And at this moment, you might remember that there used to be a proposed legislation on national security in Hong Kong back in 2003, which ended up with such a backlash and with almost 500,000 people going onto the street in protest. The only point that is new on top of that bill, which was demanded by Beijing, is terrorism.
Well, let's look at a tweet from Gina Ann Tam, who is a historian who specialises in China. She writes, for those saying that there have been warning signs of Beijing's decision for months, if not years, this is still monumental. The protests were energised by hope and unlikely possibilities. So many of Hong Kong's possible futures and the protests' possible outcomes have now been erased. And now let's hear from Martin Lee. He's a veteran politician in Hong Kong, and he in fact played a leading role in drafting the law that specified that the constitutional rights and freedoms of Hong Kong citizens when the UK handed it back to China in 1997. Here's his reaction to this news.
Well, China is going to break even more promises made to Hong Kong people and to the British government in the Sino-British Joint Declaration by keeping on doing these things. Now, it's not just the law which they intend to pass in Beijing for Hong Kong, which is clearly in breach of the Joint Declaration and the Basic Law, because it is up to the Hong Kong legislature, our Legislative Council, to enact laws for Hong Kong. The Standing Committee of the NPC cannot do it under our mini-constitution, the Basic Law, but they are going to do it. So quite apart from the draconian law which is going to be passed, it will be passed in Beijing instead of in Hong Kong. Now, I think they are afraid that they may lose control of the Hong Kong Legislative Council at the next election in a few months later in September. So they want to start a precedent so that they can legislate for Hong Kong by bypassing the Hong Kong Legislative Council. So it's a double disaster for Hong Kong.
Well, thanks to Martin Lee. Now, we still haven't had any reaction from the United Kingdom to this news. As for other international reaction, here's President Trump.
I don't know what it is because nobody knows yet. if it happens, we'll address that issue very strongly.
And Lord Chris Patten was Hong Kong's last governor before the 1997 handover. And this is what he said that the international community should be doing in response to this announcement from Beijing.
Well, I can tell you what it should be, led by the United Kingdom, which signed the joint declaration with China, and it's an international treaty lodged at the UN. We should make it clear to the Chinese that this is outrageous. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary should make that absolutely clear. We should talk to our allies, our friends around the world, all of whom have a stake in two things. First of all, the continuance of Hong Kong as a great international city in Asia. And secondly, in whether or not China can be trusted to keep its word. Now, there are all too many examples of that not being the case. The way it's actually used, the preoccupation which everybody rightly has with fighting this awful epidemic, they've used that preoccupation in order to bully and harass in other areas, and one of them's in Hong Kong.
Now, to wrap up this developing story, here's Brant in Shanghai.
This is the first significant move by Beijing since almost a year of protests on the streets of Hong Kong, and it will be incendiary on two levels. Firstly, the protesters there will see this as yet further evidence that the communist-led government in Beijing is increasingly eroding the autonomy that Hong Kong has, particularly when it comes to its legal system, its education system and its police. Secondly, it is the manner in which Beijing may be able to simply impose these changes without having to seek the approval of Hong Kong's elected officials. It has the ability to do that. It could go ahead and try to do that. Now, if this national security law were to change, and there are reports it will target any moves against secession, sedition and terrorism in Hong Kong, it may have an impact on Hong Kong's trading relationship, in particular with the United States. It has a special trading rights, and that may change if this national security law is indeed imposed. More details are likely to come on Friday. It's likely to cause further protests as well on the streets of the territory. China's leader, President Xi Jinping, has spoken in the past of crushing the protesters, who he blames, as some others in the territory and on the mainland do as well, for bringing parts of Hong Kong to near paralysis over the past year, with at times millions of people on the streets.
Of course, when we get more details on that on Friday, when that debate takes place, we'll bring that to you. At least 84 people are now known to have died in one of the most powerful cyclones to hit India and Bangladesh for years. Cyclone Amphan uprooted trees, brought down electricity and telephone lines, and flattened houses in states along India's coast and southwest Bangladesh. Yogita Lamai reports from Mumbai.
It hit West Bengal on Wednesday evening and then plundered through the state for hours. In the morning, this is what the region's biggest city looked like. Kolkata ravaged by what many residents say is the worst storm they've experienced.
It started becoming scary when actually these trees started cracking. When they fell and we understood something big is happening.
Parts of the city are underwater, including the airport.
Unfortunate, everything gone.
Across the border in Bangladesh, more destruction. Both countries have a lot of experience dealing with cyclones that develop each year in the Bay of Bengal, and evacuation measures save thousands of people. But it'll be a while before they can build back their lives.
The damage has been devastating. The scale of devastation is quite big. So I would say about 30% of the people in our working areas are not going to be back home tonight.
Bit by bit, relief teams are working to restore and rebuild. Cyclone season has just begun. Many are hoping it doesn't get any worse. Yogita Lamai, BBC News, India.
Do stay with us here on Outside Source. Still to come on the programme, the UK government buys 10 million coronavirus antibody tests, with NHS workers and care staff the first to be tested.